Maya Chen had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent their afternoons shopping or gossiping, she was in her grandfather's dojo, learning ancient martial arts techniques that had been passed down through generations. Her grandfather, Master Chen, was a respected martial artist who had trained elite soldiers in his younger days. He saw something special in Maya, a natural ability that reminded him of the greatest fighters he had ever encountered. The 17-year-old girl didn't look like much to most people. She was petite, standing barely 5 feet tall with a gentle face that often wore a quiet smile. Her long black hair was usually tied back in a simple ponytail, and she preferred comfortable clothes over fashionable ones. Teachers at school often described her as polite but unremarkable. They had no idea what lay beneath her calm exterior. Maya's parents had died in a car accident when she was 12, leaving her in the care of her grandfather. The tragedy could have broken her spirit, but instead it forged her into something stronger. Master Chen used martial arts not just to teach her self-defense, but to help her channel her grief into discipline and focus. Every morning before school, she would spend 2 hours practicing forms, meditation, and combat techniques that most people only saw in movies. The old master never pushed her too hard, but Maya pushed herself. She absorbed every lesson like a sponge, mastering techniques that took other students years to learn. Her grandfather often watched in amazement as she performed complex moves with perfect precision. He had trained hundreds of students over the decades, but none had shown such natural talent combined with relentless determination. At school, Maya kept her abilities hidden. She had learned early that being different often meant being targeted. Bullies had tried to pick on her in middle school, but after a few incidents where she defended herself with minimal force, they learned to leave her alone. She never hurt anyone seriously, just enough to make them think twice about bothering her again. Word spread quietly among the student body that the quiet Asian girl was not someone to mess with. Her teachers noticed her incredible focus and discipline. Maya never caused trouble, always completed her assignments on time, and showed respect to everyone around her. She had a few close friends who appreciated her loyalty and kindness, but most students simply didn't notice her. She preferred it that way. Attention brought questions, and questions led to demonstrations she wanted to avoid. The only person who truly understood Maya's abilities was her grandfather. Every evening after school, they would train together in the small dojo behind their house. Master Chen would share stories of his younger days, when he had trained soldiers and law enforcement officers in combat techniques. He told her about the responsibility that came with such knowledge, and the importance of using it only when absolutely necessary. Maya's favorite part of training was sparring with her grandfather. Despite his age, Master Chen was still incredibly skilled, and he never went easy on her. Their sessions were intense but respectful, filled with mutual admiration and the joy of sharing something they both loved. He taught her that true strength came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the wisdom to know when not to use that ability. As Maya approached her 18th birthday, her grandfather began preparing her for the adult world. He knew she would face challenges that would test not just her physical abilities but her character. The old master had seen too many talented fighters let their skills corrupt them, becoming arrogant or violent. He was determined that his granddaughter would be different. One evening, as they finished their training session, Master Chen sat down with Maya for one of their regular talks. The dojo was quiet except for the sound of their breathing slowly returning to normal. Candles flickered in the corners, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls decorated with ancient weapons and faded photographs of past students. "Maya," her grandfather said in his gentle but serious voice, "you have learned more in 5 years than most students learn in 20. Your technique is flawless, your speed is exceptional, and your power is remarkable for someone your size. But the most important lesson I must teach you is this: your greatest victory will always be the fight you choose not to have." Maya nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. She had seen enough movies and heard enough stories to know that people with fighting skills often found themselves in situations where they had to prove themselves. Her grandfather was preparing her for a world that might not understand or respect her abilities. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the dojo door. Master Chen frowned. They rarely had visitors this late in the evening. He opened the door to find Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor, standing on the doorstep with tears in her eyes. She explained that her grandson had gotten involved with a rough crowd and was being pressured to join some kind of training program that didn't sound legitimate to her. As Maya listened to Mrs. Rodriguez's story, she felt a familiar feeling in her stomach, the sense that trouble was coming their way. Her grandfather's expression had grown serious as he heard about this mysterious training program that was recruiting young people from their neighborhood. Something about the whole situation didn't feel right. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Maya helped her grandfather close up the dojo for the night. As they walked back to the main house, she couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful life was about to change dramatically. The quiet neighborhood that had been her sanctuary since her parents' death suddenly felt different, as if shadows were gathering at the edges of their safe world. That night, as Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about all the training sessions, all the lessons, and all the wisdom her grandfather had shared with her. She had always wondered when she might need to use her skills in a real situation. Now she had the unsettling feeling that she might find out sooner than she had ever expected. The next morning started like any other day, but Maya could sense something was different. As she walked to school, she noticed more police cars than usual patrolling the streets. Students were whispering in small groups, and there was tension in the air that made her grandfather's training instincts kick in automatically. She found herself scanning the environment more carefully, noting exit routes and potential threats without even thinking about it. During lunch, Maya's best friend Sarah approached her table with a worried expression. Sarah was one of the few people who knew about Maya's martial arts training, though she had no idea how advanced her skills really were. The two girls had been friends since middle school, bonding over their shared love of books and their mutual dislike of drama. "Maya, have you heard what's happening?" Sarah whispered, glancing around nervously. "There are these military recruiters or something at the community center. They're offering some kind of special training program for teenagers. They say it's for college scholarships and career preparation, but something feels weird about it." Maya's stomach tightened. This had to be connected to what Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned the night before. She asked Sarah for more details, but her friend only knew rumors and fragments of conversation she had overheard. What concerned Maya most was that several students had already signed up without telling their parents, attracted by promises of money and prestige. After school, instead of going straight home, Maya decided to investigate. She walked past the community center and saw several official-looking vehicles parked outside. Men and women in military-style clothing were talking to groups of teenagers and their parents. Everything looked legitimate on the surface, but Maya's training had taught her to trust her instincts, and something definitely felt wrong. She positioned herself across the street where she could observe without being noticed. The recruiters were smooth and professional, but Maya noticed subtle things that bothered her. They were particularly interested in teenagers who looked like they might be physically capable or had some kind of training. They asked specific questions about sports, martial arts, and physical fitness that seemed to go beyond normal recruitment procedures. One of the recruiters, a tall man with sergeant stripes on his uniform, caught Maya's attention. There was something about the way he moved and assessed people that reminded her of predators she had seen in nature documentaries. His eyes were constantly scanning, evaluating, calculating. When he smiled, it never reached his eyes. Maya made a mental note of his face and decided she had seen enough for now. That evening, Maya shared her observations with her grandfather. Master Chen listened carefully, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. He had dealt with military recruiters before during his younger days, and he knew the difference between legitimate programs and something more questionable. What Maya described didn't sound like any official military recruitment he was familiar with. "These people are not what they claim to be," her grandfather said after Maya finished her report. "Tomorrow we will learn more, but we must be very careful. If my suspicions are correct, they are looking for young people with potential that they can exploit." The next day brought more disturbing news. 3 students from Maya's school had signed up for the program and were scheduled to begin training that weekend. One of them was Carlos Rodriguez, Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson, the same boy she had been worried about. Maya realized that her peaceful life was definitely coming to an end. During her martial arts class that afternoon, Maya noticed that her grandfather was teaching her more aggressive techniques than usual. Instead of focusing on defensive moves and forms, he was showing her combat applications that he had never taught her before. The old master was preparing her for real conflict, though he hoped it would never come to that. "Maya," he said during a break in their training, "I have contacted some old friends who still have connections to legitimate military and law enforcement agencies. What is happening in our neighborhood is not sanctioned by any official organization. These people are running some kind of illegal training camp, and they are targeting young people who won't be missed or who don't have strong family support." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. She thought about Carlos and the other students who had already signed up. They were walking into a trap, and they had no idea what they were facing. Her grandfather continued explaining that he suspected the operation was being run by former military personnel who had gone rogue, possibly selling their services to criminal organizations or foreign interests. That night, Maya could barely sleep. She kept thinking about all the students who might be in danger and wondering what she could possibly do to help them. She was just one teenager. Even if she was better trained than most adults, how could she take on an entire organization of dangerous people? The answer came the next morning when Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at their door again, this time in complete panic. Carlos had left for the training program the night before and was supposed to call her when he arrived. She hadn't heard from him, and when she tried calling the number the recruiters had given her, it was disconnected. She begged Master Chen to help her find her grandson. Maya watched her grandfather's face as he listened to Mrs. Rodriguez's pleas. She could see the internal struggle he was facing. His instincts told him to keep his granddaughter safe and avoid getting involved in something so dangerous. But his sense of honor and responsibility wouldn't let him ignore the fact that innocent young people were in serious trouble. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Maya and her grandfather sat in silence for a long time. Finally, the old master spoke. "Maya, I have trained you not just in martial arts, but in the values that make those skills meaningful. We cannot turn our backs on people who need our help. But if we choose this path, there will be no turning back. These people will not hesitate to hurt us if they see us as a threat." Maya looked into her grandfather's eyes and saw the same determination that had driven her through years of training. "Grandfather, you taught me that our greatest victory is the fight we choose not to have. But sometimes, choosing not to fight means letting innocent people suffer. I think this is one of those times when we have to fight." Master Chen nodded slowly, pride and worry warring in his expression. His granddaughter had grown into exactly the kind of person he had hoped she would become. But now that strength and character were going to be tested in ways he had prayed would never happen. Maya and her grandfather spent the next 2 days gathering information and preparing for what they both knew would be a dangerous mission. Master Chen used his old military contacts to learn more about the fake recruitment operation, while Maya did her own investigation at school and around the neighborhood. What they discovered made the situation even more urgent than they had initially thought. The operation was bigger than just their community. Similar recruitments were happening in several cities, all targeting teenagers from lower-income families or those without strong support systems. The recruits were taken to remote training facilities where they were supposedly being prepared for military or security careers. In reality, they were being trained as enforcers and operatives for criminal organizations that needed young people who could blend into normal society. Master Chen's contacts revealed that the organization was run by a man named Colonel Marcus Steele, a former Special Forces officer who had been dishonorably discharged for using excessive force and conducting unauthorized operations. Steele had gathered other disgraced military personnel and created a private training company that sold its services to the highest bidder. The teenagers they recruited were told they were training for legitimate careers, but they were actually being turned into criminals. Maya felt sick when she learned that several previous graduates of the program had been arrested for serious crimes in other states. The pattern was always the same. Young people with no criminal history would suddenly be involved in sophisticated operations that required military-style training. By the time law enforcement connected the dots, the training camps had moved to new locations and the recruiters had disappeared. The facility where Carlos and the other local recruits had been taken was located in an abandoned military base about 2 hours outside the city. Master Chen's sources confirmed that it was heavily guarded and that the recruits were not allowed to leave or communicate with the outside world once training began. Anyone who tried to quit or complained about the program simply vanished. Maya knew they couldn't wait for law enforcement to act. Even if her grandfather's contacts could convince the authorities to investigate, it would take weeks to organize a proper operation. By then, Carlos and the others might be moved to another facility or worse. They had to act now, but they needed a plan that would work against trained soldiers on their own territory. Master Chen had one advantage that the criminals didn't know about. He had helped design security systems for several military bases during his active duty years. He still had architectural plans and security protocols for the facility they were using. It wasn't much, but it was better than going in completely blind. The plan they developed was risky but simple. Maya would pose as a potential recruit and get herself taken to the facility. Once inside, she would gather intelligence about the layout, the guards, and where the recruits were being held. Her grandfather would position himself nearby with backup communication equipment and weapons, ready to extract her and any recruits they could save. Maya spent hours memorizing the facility layout and practicing her cover story. She would claim to be a runaway with martial arts training, who was interested in the money and adventure the recruiters promised. Her small size and young appearance would make her seem like an ideal candidate, someone they could easily control and manipulate. The hardest part was waiting for the right moment to make contact with the recruiters. Maya needed to approach them in a way that seemed natural and wouldn't raise suspicions. Her opportunity came when she learned that they were holding another recruitment session at a different community center across town. Maya dressed down in old clothes and practiced looking desperate and eager. She had to appear vulnerable enough to be an attractive target, but not so broken that they would see her as useless. Her grandfather coached her on military terminology and procedures, so she could convince them that she had some basic knowledge, but needed their advanced training. The night before the mission, Maya couldn't sleep. She kept going over the plan in her mind, looking for flaws or problems she might have missed. Her grandfather found her in the dojo at 3 a.m, practicing her combat forms with an intensity that made the wooden floor vibrate under her feet. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently, sitting down on the mat beside where she was training. Maya stopped mid-movement and sat down facing him. "I'm scared, grandfather. Not of getting hurt. You've trained me well enough that I can handle physical danger. I'm scared of what I might have to do to other people. What if I have to seriously hurt someone? What if I have to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Master Chen understood her fear. It was the same concern he had faced when he first went into combat as a young soldier. The transition from training to real violence was one that changed a person forever, and he had hoped his granddaughter would never have to make that journey. "Maya, the people we are going to face have chosen to hurt innocent children. They have given up their right to mercy when they decided to destroy young lives for profit. You will do only what is necessary to protect yourself and save those recruits. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and remember that every technique I taught you can be used with different levels of force. You don't have to become a killer to be effective." His words helped calm her fears, but Maya knew that once she walked into that facility, she would be crossing a line she could never uncross. The quiet, peaceful life she had known was ending, and she was about to discover what she was truly capable of when everything she cared about was on the line. The next morning, Maya and her grandfather drove to the community center, where the recruiters were holding their session. They parked several blocks away, and Maya walked the rest of the distance alone. As she approached the building, she could see the same vehicles and the same professional-looking people in military clothing. Her heart was pounding, but her grandfather's training kicked in automatically, calming her breathing and focusing her mind. The sergeant who had caught her attention during her first observation was standing near the entrance, scanning potential recruits as they approached. Maya forced herself to look nervous and excited as she walked up to him. This was it. The moment that would determine whether her plan worked or whether she was walking into a trap she couldn't escape from. Maya approached the recruitment table with carefully practiced hesitation, making herself appear both eager and nervous. The sergeant she had observed before looked up from his paperwork and immediately focused on her with predatory interest. His name tag read Sergeant Torres, and everything about his demeanor suggested he was used to intimidating people much larger than Maya. "You look a little young, sweetheart," Torres said with a condescending smile. "This isn't summer camp we're running here. This is serious training for serious people." Maya had anticipated this response and was ready with her cover story. She explained that she was 18 but looked younger, that she had been living on her own since her parents died, and that she had some martial arts background but needed real combat training to make something of herself. She made sure to mention that she had no close family or friends who would miss her if she disappeared for a few months. Torres listened to her story with growing interest. Everything about Maya fit their ideal recruit profile: young, alone, desperate, and physically capable. After a few more questions designed to confirm that she wouldn't be missed, he handed her a stack of papers to fill out. The forms were designed to look official, but Maya noticed they asked for information that legitimate military recruiters would never need. While she filled out the paperwork, Maya observed the other potential recruits around her. Most were teenage boys, but there were a few girls as well. They all had the same desperate, hopeful look that she was trying to project. None of them seemed to realize they were being evaluated like livestock at a market. The psychological manipulation tactics the recruiters used were sophisticated and effective. They made the teenagers feel special and important, promising them skills and opportunities they couldn't get anywhere else. They created a sense of urgency by claiming that only a limited number of spots were available. Most importantly, they made the recruits feel like they were choosing this path, when in reality they were being carefully guided toward a predetermined decision. After Maya submitted her paperwork, she was told to wait while they processed her application. She sat in a plastic chair and watched as other recruits went through individual interviews. Some were accepted immediately, while others were politely dismissed. The selection criteria seemed to focus on physical capability combined with social isolation. When her turn came, Maya was led into a small office where Torres and another recruiter, a woman with captain's bars, conducted a more detailed interview. They asked about her martial arts background, testing her knowledge to make sure she wasn't lying. Maya was careful to demonstrate enough skill to be valuable, but not so much that they would see her as a threat. The interview lasted about 20 minutes, with the recruiters alternating between friendly encouragement and subtle intimidation tactics. Maya had to fight every instinct her grandfather had trained into her, as they invaded her personal space and used body language designed to make her feel small and vulnerable. She forced herself to react the way a desperate teenager would, rather than the way a trained martial artist should. Finally, Torres leaned back in his chair and exchanged a look with his partner. "Congratulations, Maya. You've been accepted into our advanced training program. You'll be leaving tonight, so I hope you don't have any loose ends to tie up around here." Maya expressed the appropriate amount of excitement, while inwardly calculating how many hours she had before her grandfather would expect her to check in. They gave her an address where she should meet the transport vehicle at 8 o'clock that evening, warning her not to bring anything except basic clothing and toiletries. Everything else would be provided at the training facility. The rest of the day passed slowly as Maya waited for evening to arrive. She spent the time reviewing everything her grandfather had taught her about surviving in hostile environments and gathering intelligence. She also practiced the mental exercises he had shown her for maintaining focus under stress and resisting interrogation techniques. At 7:30, Maya kissed her grandfather goodbye, knowing it might be the last time she ever saw him. Master Chen held her for a long moment, whispering final advice and reminders about the emergency communication procedures they had established. If she didn't check in within 72 hours, he would assume the worst and contact his law enforcement friends regardless of the consequences. The pickup location was in a dark parking lot behind an abandoned shopping center. Maya arrived to find a military-style transport truck, waiting with several other new recruits already inside. Torres was there to make sure everyone showed up, and he did a final count before signaling the driver to leave. During the 2-hour drive to the facility, Maya listened carefully to conversations around her and tried to get a sense of her fellow recruits. Most were exactly what she expected: desperate young people who saw this as their only chance for a better life. A few seemed more streetwise and potentially dangerous, but none appeared to have any real training or experience. The boy sitting next to her introduced himself as Jake and seemed determined to make friends with everyone. He was about 19, had been homeless for 6 months, and was excited about the opportunity to learn skills that would help him get a good job. Maya felt guilty about deceiving him, but she reminded herself that she was there to save him and the others from something much worse than disappointment. As the truck turned off the main highway onto a series of increasingly remote roads, Maya began recognizing landmarks from the maps her grandfather had shown her. They were definitely heading toward the abandoned military base, which meant her intelligence was accurate. That gave her some confidence, but it also meant she was about to enter a facility designed to keep people in and enemies out. The truck finally stopped at a checkpoint with guards carrying automatic weapons. Maya could see high fences topped with razor wire stretching into the darkness on both sides of the gate. Floodlights illuminated the immediate area, but beyond that, everything was black. This was not a place anyone could easily escape from. Torres got out to speak with the guards while the recruits waited nervously in the back of the truck. Maya used the opportunity to study what she could see of the facility layout. The main buildings were about half a mile past the checkpoint, connected by well-lit roads that would make movement at night extremely difficult for anyone trying to avoid detection. After a few minutes, Torres returned and the truck was waved through the checkpoint. As they drove toward the main facility, Maya saw exactly what her grandfather had described from the architectural plans. The compound consisted of several large buildings surrounded by smaller structures that appeared to be barracks and training facilities. Everything was laid out with military precision and designed for maximum security. The truck stopped in front of what looked like a processing center, where more guards waited to escort the new recruits inside. Maya took a deep breath and reminded herself of everything she needed to accomplish. Find the other recruits who had been brought here earlier, gather intelligence about the facility's operations and security, and somehow find a way to communicate with her grandfather when the time came for extraction. As she stepped down from the truck, Maya noticed Sergeant Torres watching her with an expression that made her skin crawl. There was something in his eyes that suggested he suspected she wasn't entirely what she claimed to be. She would have to be extremely careful around him, because one mistake could expose her mission and put everyone in even greater danger. The processing center was a sterile, intimidating space that reminded Maya of military recruitment stations she had seen in movies, but with an underlying menace that felt completely wrong. New recruits were separated by gender and led through what appeared to be standard intake procedures, medical examinations, equipment distribution, and orientation briefings. Maya noticed that all personal belongings, including cell phones and identification, were confiscated and locked away for security purposes. During her medical exam, Maya had to be extremely careful to hide her true physical condition. Years of intensive martial arts training had given her muscle tone and reflexes that would immediately identify her as far more advanced than she claimed to be. She slouched, moved clumsily, and acted nervous to disguise her real capabilities. The examining physician, a tired-looking woman who seemed to be going through the motions, made notes about Maya's apparent fitness level without looking too closely. After processing, the new recruits were assigned to barracks and given their first meal at the facility. Maya found herself in a large dormitory-style room with 12 other girls, ranging in age from 16 to 19. As she unpacked her few belongings, she listened to conversations around her and began building a mental map of who was who and how long they had been there. Most disturbing was learning that several girls had been at the facility for over a month and were already showing signs of the psychological conditioning that was obviously part of the program. They spoke with enthusiasm about their training and seemed genuinely excited about their future careers in private security. Maya realized that the brainwashing process was more sophisticated and effective than she had anticipated. During dinner in the mess hall, Maya finally saw some of the recruits from her own neighborhood, including Carlos Rodriguez. He was sitting with a group of boys who had arrived around the same time, and Maya was relieved to see that he still looked like himself, rather than the hollow-eyed converts she had observed among the longer-term residents. There was still time to save him and the others, but she would have to work quickly. The evening orientation session was conducted by Colonel Steele himself, and Maya immediately understood why this man was dangerous. He had the charisma and authority of a natural leader, combined with the cold calculation of someone who saw people as tools to be used. Steele spoke about honor, discipline, and the opportunity to serve a higher purpose, but everything he said was designed to break down the recruits' existing beliefs and replace them with absolute loyalty to him and his organization. Maya watched the faces of her fellow recruits as Steele spoke, and she could see his words taking effect. These desperate young people wanted to believe they had found something meaningful, and Steele was giving them exactly what they needed to hear. The psychological manipulation was masterful and terrifying in its effectiveness. After the orientation, recruits were given 1 hour of personal time before lights out. Maya used this opportunity to explore the facility as much as possible, without attracting attention. She memorized the locations of exits, guard stations, and communications equipment while maintaining the appearance of a curious but harmless new arrival. The layout was exactly as her grandfather had described, but the security was much tighter than the old architectural plans had indicated. Every door required keycard access, cameras covered all corridors and common areas, and guards patrolled on unpredictable schedules. Maya began to understand why no one had ever escaped from this place. It would require either inside help or a significant external rescue operation. During her exploration, Maya overheard a conversation between two instructors that made her blood run cold. They were discussing the graduation ceremony scheduled for the following week, when the current advanced class would be shipped out to their first assignments. From what Maya could gather, these assignments involved criminal activities that would put the recruits in serious legal jeopardy while generating substantial profits for Steele's organization. The first day of training began at 5 in the morning with physical conditioning that was designed to push the recruits beyond their limits. Maya had to be extremely careful to perform at the level expected of someone with her claimed background, while hiding her true capabilities. She made sure to struggle with exercises that should have been easy for her, gasping for breath and showing signs of fatigue that were completely artificial. The training program was well-designed and intensive, covering everything from basic combat techniques to weapons handling to what they called tactical operations. Maya recognized many of the techniques from her grandfather's teachings, but they were being presented in a context that emphasized aggression and ruthlessness over discipline and honor. The instructors were all former military personnel who had clearly been chosen for their willingness to train killers rather than soldiers. During combat training, Maya faced her biggest challenge yet. She was paired with other recruits for sparring sessions, and she had to lose fights against opponents she could have defeated easily. Every instinct screamed at her to demonstrate her real abilities, especially when facing bullies who seemed to enjoy hurting weaker opponents. But she forced herself to take hits and fall down, building her cover identity as someone who needed the training they were providing. The psychological conditioning was constant and subtle. Instructors praised recruits for showing aggression and dismissed concerns about ethics or legality as weakness. They created an us versus them mentality that painted the outside world as hostile and untrustworthy. Maya watched her fellow recruits gradually changing, becoming harder and more accepting of ideas they would have rejected just days earlier. On her third night at the facility, Maya finally managed to make contact with Carlos Rodriguez during a bathroom break that wasn't monitored by cameras. She had to be extremely careful about what she said and how she said it, because she couldn't risk exposing her mission or putting him in danger. "Carlos," she whispered urgently, "your grandmother is worried about you. She tried calling the number they gave her, but it's disconnected. Do you remember what they told you about communicating with family?" Carlos looked confused and slightly defensive. "They said we're not supposed to have outside contact during the initial training phase. It's for security reasons and to help us focus." "Maya, what are you doing here? I didn't know you were interested in this kind of thing." Maya realized that Carlos was already beginning to show signs of the psychological conditioning. He was defending the people who had essentially kidnapped him, and was accepting their explanations without question. She would have to be very careful about how much she revealed and when. "I needed a change in my life," Maya said, sticking to her cover story. "But I'm having second thoughts about some of the training methods. Have you noticed anything that seems wrong about this place?" Before Carlos could answer, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, and they both quickly returned to their respective dormitories. Maya had learned enough to know that her time was running short. The recruits were being changed rapidly and systematically, and soon it would be too late to save them. She needed to find a way to communicate with her grandfather and start planning their escape before the graduation ceremony turned Carlos and the others into criminals who could never return to normal life. That night, as Maya lay in her narrow bunk listening to the quiet breathing of 12 other girls who had no idea what was really happening to them, she began planning the most dangerous part of her mission. She had gathered the intelligence she needed about the facility and its operations. Now she had to find a way to get that information to her grandfather and coordinate a rescue operation that would save as many recruits as possible without getting everyone killed in the process. Maya's opportunity came on her 4th day at the facility, when she volunteered for kitchen duty during the evening meal preparation. The kitchen staff was a mix of recruits and permanent personnel, and the work detail provided access to areas of the facility that were normally off-limits. More importantly, Maya had noticed that one of the kitchen supervisors carried a two-way radio that appeared to be connected to an external communication system rather than just internal security. While scrubbing pots and preparing vegetables, Maya carefully observed the supervisor's routine and the location where he stored his radio during breaks. She also mapped out the kitchen's relationship to the rest of the facility, noting that the loading dock where supply trucks arrived was connected to the kitchen through a series of service corridors. If her grandfather was going to mount any kind of rescue operation, those corridors might provide the best entry point. The radio was her immediate priority, but getting access to it would require creating a distraction that wouldn't seem suspicious. Maya noticed that one of the industrial stoves had a gas connection that could be easily loosened, causing a minor leak that would require immediate attention from the supervisor. While he was dealing with the emergency, she could grab his radio and send a brief message to her grandfather using the emergency frequencies they had agreed upon. Maya waited until the kitchen was busy with dinner preparation before implementing her plan. She carefully loosened the gas connection behind one of the stoves, creating a hissing sound and the smell of gas that immediately got everyone's attention. The supervisor rushed to shut off the gas line while other kitchen workers evacuated the immediate area, giving Maya the few seconds she needed to grab his radio and duck into a storage closet. Her hands were shaking as she switched to the emergency frequency and transmitted the coded message she had memorized. Package delivered. Pickup required tomorrow night. Loading dock. 23 items. The message told her grandfather that she was safe, that extraction was needed the following night, that the loading dock was the best entry point, and that there were 23 recruits from their area who needed to be rescued. Maya held her breath waiting for a response, knowing that her grandfather might not be monitoring the frequency at that exact moment. After 30 seconds that felt like hours, his voice crackled through the radio. Message received. Weather forecast looks good. We'll bring appropriate equipment. The coded reply confirmed that he understood her situation and would bring law enforcement backup for the rescue operation. She quickly returned the radio to its original location and rejoined the kitchen cleanup crew, acting concerned about the gas leak like everyone else. The supervisor was too busy dealing with the maintenance issue to notice that his radio had been moved, and the incident was written off as a minor equipment malfunction that happened regularly in older facilities. That evening, Maya noticed increased tension among the permanent staff. Sergeant Torres was conducting more frequent inspections, and there seemed to be additional security measures being implemented throughout the facility. She wondered if her radio transmission had been detected, or if something else was making the staff nervous. Either way, it meant that tomorrow night's rescue would be even more dangerous than originally planned. During the evening's tactical training session, Maya was forced to participate in exercises that made her physically ill. The recruits were being taught techniques for intimidating civilians, conducting illegal searches, and using violence to achieve compliance. Worse, many of her fellow recruits were enthusiastically embracing these lessons, having been conditioned to believe they were learning legitimate law enforcement skills. The instructor for this session was a man called Lieutenant Morrison, who had clearly been chosen for his ability to make violence seem normal and necessary. He praised recruits who showed aggression and creativity in applying the techniques, while subtly shaming anyone who hesitated or showed reluctance to hurt others. Maya watched Carlos participating in these exercises with growing horror, realizing how quickly good people could be turned into something dangerous under the right circumstances. After training, Maya managed to have another brief conversation with Carlos during the evening meal. She was relieved to see that he still had doubts about some aspects of the program, even though he was trying to convince himself that everything was legitimate. She carefully planted seeds of suspicion about the training methods and the facility's security measures, hoping to prepare him for what might happen during the rescue attempt. Carlos, have you noticed that we haven't been allowed to call our families at all? Maya asked quietly. Even basic military training allows some communication with home. And some of these combat techniques they're teaching us seem more like criminal methods than law enforcement procedures. Carlos looked around nervously before responding. I've been thinking the same thing, but the instructors say it's all necessary for advanced security work. They keep telling us that regular law enforcement training is outdated and ineffective. But you're right about the communication thing. That does seem weird. Maya could see that Carlos was struggling between his growing suspicions and the psychological conditioning he had been subjected to. She decided to take a calculated risk and give him some information that might help him make the right choice when the time came. Carlos, what if I told you that your grandmother never gave permission for you to be here? What if I told you that she's been trying to find you ever since you left? Maya watched his face carefully as she spoke, ready to back down if he seemed likely to report their conversation to the instructors. For a moment, Carlos looked genuinely confused and concerned. Then his expression hardened in a way that reminded Maya of the other conditioned recruits she had observed. Maya, you're starting to sound like you don't want to be here. The instructors warned us that some people would try to undermine our commitment to the program. Maybe you should think about whether this is really right for you. Maya realized that Carlos was further along in the conditioning process than she had hoped. The rescue operation would have to account for the possibility that some of the recruits might actually resist being saved, having been convinced that the facility was helping them rather than exploiting them. This added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. The next day passed slowly as Maya tried to maintain her cover while preparing mentally for the rescue attempt. She paid careful attention to guard schedules and security protocols, noting any changes that might affect her grandfather's plan. She also tried to identify which recruits were most likely to cooperate with a rescue and which ones might cause problems. As evening approached, Maya felt the familiar pre-combat nervousness that her grandfather had taught her to recognize and channel. Every sense was heightened, every muscle ready for action. She had spent years training for situations like this, but knowing that real lives depended on her performance made everything feel different. During the final training session of the day, Maya noticed that Sergeant Torres was watching her more closely than usual. Several times she caught him staring at her with an expression that suggested he was trying to figure something out. When the session ended, he approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maya, I'd like to speak with you privately after dinner. There are some questions about your background that need to be clarified before you can advance to the next phase of training. His tone was casual, but Maya heard the underlying threat clearly. Maya nodded and tried to look appropriately nervous about being singled out. Of course, Sergeant. Is there something wrong with my performance? Nothing to worry about, Torres replied, but his eyes never left her face. Just routine verification procedures. Meet me in the administrative building at 2100 hours. As Torres walked away, Maya realized that her time had run out. Whether he suspected her true identity or was just following standard procedures, being isolated for questioning would put her in extreme danger and might compromise the entire rescue operation. She would have to find a way to avoid that meeting without making her situation worse, and she had less than 3 hours to figure out how. Maya knew she had to act fast. Instead of waiting for the 2100 meeting that would likely expose her mission, she decided to force the timeline and create the distraction her grandfather would need for the rescue operation. She spent the dinner hour observing guard rotations and identifying the exact moment when security would be lightest around the loading dock area. At 20:30 hours, 30 minutes before her scheduled interrogation with Torres, Maya excused herself to use the bathroom and instead headed toward the facility's main electrical panel, which she had located during her kitchen duty reconnaissance. Her grandfather had taught her basic sabotage techniques, and she knew that cutting power to specific sections of the facility would create enough chaos to mask a rescue operation, while also disabling many of the electronic security systems. The electrical panel was located in a maintenance room that required a key card she didn't have. Maya used a technique her grandfather had shown her for bypassing electronic locks, involving a small piece of metal from her belt buckle and precise timing. The lock disengaged just as she heard footsteps approaching in the corridor outside. Maya quickly identified the circuits that controlled lighting and security cameras for the loading dock area, the dormitories, and the administrative building. She waited until exactly 2100 hours before throwing the switches, plunging those sections of the facility into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, but it would take several minutes for security personnel to identify and fix the problem. In the confusion that followed, Maya made her way through darkened corridors toward the loading dock, using her memorized layout of the facility. to navigate without the visual landmarks she had been relying on. She could hear guards shouting orders and scrambling to restore power while trying to account for all the recruits who were supposed to be in their dormitories. Maya reached the loading dock just as she heard the distinctive sound of bolt cutters working on the fence outside. Her grandfather had arrived exactly on schedule, and she could see the shapes of several people moving in the darkness beyond the loading area. The rescue team was small but professional. Her grandfather had obviously chosen quality over quantity for this operation. The loading dock's main door was electronic and had been disabled by the power outage, but Maya found a manual override that allowed her to open it just wide enough for people to squeeze through. Master Chen appeared in the opening, followed by two men in tactical gear who were obviously law enforcement officers. Maya had never been so happy to see her grandfather in her life. "Status report," Master Chen whispered urgently. 23 local recruits still inside, scattered between two dormitories. Unknown number of guards and instructors heavily armed. Some recruits have been psychologically conditioned and may resist rescue. Sergeant Torres was about to interrogate me. He suspects something. One of the law enforcement officers, who identified himself as Agent Martinez, took charge of the tactical situation. "We have backup units positioned around the perimeter, but we need to extract the civilians before we can move against the main facility. Can you guide us to the dormitories?" Maya led the small team through the darkened corridors, using hand signals she had learned from her grandfather to communicate silently. They encountered two guards who were investigating the power outage, but Agent Martinez and his partner neutralized them quickly and quietly, using non-lethal methods. The first dormitory they reached was the boys' section where Carlos and the other male recruits were housed. Maya could hear confused voices inside as the occupants tried to figure out what was happening with the lights. She knocked on the door and identified herself, asking everyone to gather in the center of the room. When Maya entered with her grandfather and the agents, the reaction was mixed. Some recruits were relieved to see what appeared to be a rescue operation, but others seemed suspicious and defensive. Carlos was among those who hung back, clearly uncertain about whether he wanted to be rescued from a program he had been conditioned to believe was helping him. "Everyone listen carefully," Agent Martinez announced, showing his badge and identification. "This facility is operating illegally, and you are all victims of a criminal organization. We are here to take you home safely, but we need to move quickly." Several recruits immediately moved toward the agents, eager to leave, but Carlos and 3 other boys remained where they were, looking confused and conflicted. Maya realized that the psychological conditioning was stronger than she had hoped, and some of the recruits genuinely believed they were being rescued from a legitimate opportunity. "Carlos," Maya said gently, "your grandmother has been looking for you. She never signed any papers giving permission for you to be here. These people lied to you and your family." Carlos looked torn between his loyalty to the program and his growing suspicions. Finally, he stepped forward and asked, "Maya, how do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know these men are really police officers and not competitors trying to steal us from our training?" Before Maya could answer, the sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from somewhere else in the facility. The main assault team had apparently encountered resistance, and the window for a quiet extraction was rapidly closing. Agent Martinez grabbed his radio and called for immediate evacuation support. "We're out of time," he announced. "Everyone who wants to leave needs to move now. Anyone who stays behind will be considered a hostile when the main assault begins." The sound of gunfire made the decision easier for most of the recruits. Carlos and the other hesitant boys joined the group heading for the exit, though Maya could see they were still uncertain about whether they were making the right choice. The evacuation to the second dormitory was more complicated, because they had to move through areas where the facility's defenders were setting up defensive positions. Maya found herself in a combat situation for the first time in her life as armed instructors tried to prevent the rescue team from reaching the female recruits when Sergeant Torres appeared at the end of a corridor with an assault rifle. Maya knew her cover was completely blown. Torres recognized her immediately and realized that she had been the source of the intelligence that made the rescue possible. His face twisted with rage as he raised his weapon toward her. Maya's training took over completely. Years of practice with her grandfather had prepared her for exactly this moment. Even though she had hoped it would never come, she moved faster than Torres expected, using the narrow corridor to her advantage as she closed the distance between them. Torres got off one shot that went wide before Maya reached him. The combat techniques her grandfather had taught her were designed for exactly this situation, disarming an opponent in close quarters while minimizing the risk to bystanders. Maya's movements were fluid and precise, decades of training compressed into seconds of decisive action. The sergeant was bigger and stronger than Maya, but he had made the mistake of underestimating her abilities based on her size and apparent age. When Maya broke his grip on the rifle and used his own momentum to throw him against the concrete wall, Torres realized he was facing someone far more dangerous than the scared teenager he thought he had been manipulating. Maya stood over Torres's unconscious form, breathing heavily and trying to process what had just happened. She had successfully defended herself and protected the rescue operation, but she had also crossed a line that would change her forever. The quiet, peaceful life she had known was definitely over, replaced by the knowledge that she was capable of violence when the situation demanded it. Agent Martinez appeared beside her and quickly secured Torres's weapon. "Nice work," he said simply. "Your grandfather trained you well. Now let's finish getting these kids out of here." The extraction of the female recruits went more smoothly, and within 20 minutes, all 23 local recruits were safely outside the facility perimeter. As Maya watched her fellow captives being reunited with FBI agents and social workers who would help them readjust to normal life, she felt a mixture of pride and sadness that was difficult to process. Master Chen put his arm around his granddaughter as they watched the facility being secured by the tactical teams. "You did something very important tonight, Maya. Those young people will have a chance at normal lives because of your courage." Maya nodded, but she was thinking about how different she felt from the person who had entered the facility just 5 days earlier. She had discovered capabilities within herself that went far beyond anything she had learned in training, and she knew that knowledge would stay with her forever. As dawn broke over the abandoned military base, Maya realized that while one chapter of her life had ended, another was just beginning. She had proven to herself and others that she was capable of standing up to real evil when innocent lives were at stake. The question now was what she would do with that knowledge and those abilities in the years to come.